whenever you can, go to the year that you're writing at and explore that rather than everyone's lens of that year. And go to the music, go to everything. Just immerse yourself in that time and that place. I think the first adaptations I did were for radio. And I love writing for radio, incredibly intelligent form and brilliant directors who are also the producers, so you're in a kind of nice tight net. So I did Dracula, I did a lot of Anne Tyler, and it was very useful just in terms of, okay, you've got 45 minutes or 15-minute episodes and just sort of seeing how much material you could get into something. So, yeah, I mean, radio drama doesn't produce as much these days, but it's very brilliant. I think it's far easier to adapt something that's not well known or even not, that striking a piece of itself, and you inject it with other things just because there's a certain liberation there. The pressure is less.
Where do you begin when you know that you need to be adapting someone else's work?
For me, it's very basic. You just read and read and read the piece. And if it's a book, you read and read. And, that one first solid book in your hand is your reference material, and you scroll and you underline. And, that's how I do it in a very school fashion, and just... So I would do a first read and lift, almost like, make bullet points of, okay, this is the event, this is that, and underline dialogue that I think is essential. And then lift that into a kind of Word document, of, right, these are the important things. And I would probably quite soon dive into an actual adaptation after that, rather than read and read and reread the book all the time, just because I would feel intimidated by the material. So I'd sort of get the material, go for a kind of lift off into a first draft, and then go back to the material when I feel quite confident with the draft and think, I've missed out this, I've missed out that. And, so it's almost like you've got to find your confidence. And I find that flying away from it, for me, is quite good at the beginning.
And you mentioned the 12 consultants and disobedience, and this was actually one of my questions. Then it's about research, especially when it's something that is so such a specific world that you don't want to misrepresent. And if you don't belong to that particular community, in the case of disobedience, for anyone who's not read the book or has seen the film, it's based on the Orthodox Jewish community in North London. How much research do you do?
Well, we read the book again and again, myself and Sebastian, and then we met Naomi, and we went into North London and met some people who were in the Jewish Orthodox community, and that was incredibly liberating. Like, we met a rabbi who looked me in the eye and said, "How's it going?" And like, if I hadn't met him, I would think, because a rule is that you don't look someone in the eye. So I said, "Sorry if it sounds, but you're looking at me." And he was like, "Yeah, well, some people do, some people don't. It's very Jewish, And I was kind of like, there is a rule, but you can bend it, and there is another rule, but it's not for everyone. And it was so sort of liberating. Not only that, they were giving us kind of freedom, but also that we had this very solid net around us if we were going wrong. I mean, one weekend we stayed in a Jewish hotel in Stamford Hill, and we spent the weekend there just to sort of feel like we were in the community. And we got really excited, and we said, "God, this script is just dull, it's dull." And we got it down from like 90 pages to about 17, and we sent it off. We said, "This is it, this is the essence, this is what we're after." And we sort of got a reply, I think you've got a bit carried away, and we sort of reinstated some things, but so there are these kind of flights of, and it's lovely to have that energy. It's really brilliant to have, somebody, that we're working absolutely shoulder to shoulder.
How important is just being in the space that you're writing about, or surrounded by people that you're writing about, for you to write about them, essentially?
Well, I think it's wonderful if you can do it, but I don't think it's essential. I mean, I co-wrote Ida without going to Poland. But at the same time, Pavel was feeding me a lot of amazing research, like all the sort of mini films that national film students at Woolwich had made in the 50s and 60s. So I felt I was there. You know, I think if you feel you're there and you feel like you're in that particular place, you don't have to physically be there. But if you're not feeling like you're in the space, then you need to find something that will get you to that space, you know, be it YouTube or books. Or I think contemporary stuff is essential. You know, I think that you can look at things through a kind of, you know, rose-coloured glasses or whatever. But, you know, when I was writing about the suffragettes for theatre, the most essential stuff was first-hand testimony from the suffragettes rather than academics who are brilliant writing about them today. But the first-hand testimony was just so freeing because I just thought these are young women. You know, they're in their 20s and, you know, they're leaving letters to their mother saying, if I'm not here tomorrow, it's because I'm arrested, you know, and it just broke your heart. You know, so I think whenever you can, go to the year that you're writing at and explore that rather than everyone's lens of that year. And go to the music, go to everything. You know, just immerse yourself in that time and that place.
And it kind of neatly brings me on to talking a little bit more in depth about She Said, which is, you know, your most recent project, one that you wrote without a co-writer. What is your own relationship with the book that originated from that piece of research?
The book wasn't out when I met them. They were writing it. So I'm kind of remembering about 6 or 7 weeks of free fall, just going into the script without the book. I had research from them and I'd been to their homes and I'd met their children and their partners. So I had some solid ground and I'd obviously read all the articles around it, the follow-up articles, but the book wasn't there. So that was interesting because it was just like, okay, what's my in? And I just knew that it had to be incredibly female and layered. And I'd seen them in their homes just like juggling, you know, mothering and working. And I thought, well, that's part of it, obviously. And I went from there. And then as I was writing it, they would send me these top secret, you know, chapters that exploded in 2 days. And I would, you know, read them. And then they redrafted those chapters, which was interesting to see what they'd taken out and why. And then we kept meeting and talking. And that was the process. I think my way in was just, this has happened to so many people, so many women, sexual assault. And I just wanted, and not just sexual assault, but abuse of power. And so I wanted to start on a very kind of primal level of, you know, the strength of women and the resilience. And then sort of go into the story.
And was the sense of responsibility to Megan and to Jodi, because not only are you adapting their work, which is in itself radically different from a piece of fiction, even if it is autobiographical, but you're also using them as characters. Like, what was your sense of responsibility to them as you were also working essentially with them on adapting their work as they were writing it?
Yeah, it was big, but you just can't wear these things. You just sort of think, I'm a writer, I can do this. You know, let's get there and then let's see what they say. You know, you just can't have this kind of, you know, so whenever you're adapting something, you just have to forget about all that and just go forward and see what feels good in terms of rhythm and character and your own writing, you know, because you are doing something that is particular to you, you know, so you just can't wear all of that weight. You know, it might be there, but you just address it at a future point. The other thing that I think they were even keener to get right was the journalism. And I was an absolute, you know, novice at that. So for that, I relied on them and everyone at the New York Times just to say, you know, you're wrong. You know, we would say this and we would say that. I didn't realize how neutral they had to be. I didn't realize about the codes of conduct and the ethics. So that was fascinating. And the script was just enhanced by their flinty kind of, I wouldn't say that about Trump. And I said, what, not even to a woman who would, no, you know, I can't, you know, I can't be seen to trash this or, you know, it was, so that was fascinating. Well, in the book is amazing and it's a real page turner. It's an absolute thriller and incredible. And there's a huge amount of material in it and you could have done about 9 hours just from the book. But I wanted, first of all, to be very much in the point of view of the journalists, so I was following them very much. And I also wanted it to be incredibly female, so swathes of information about Bob Weinstein and the more sort of masculine part kind of went, because I just wanted to concentrate on that. And also, it was incredibly important that you give space to the survivors. So the 3 women who I met were Laura Madden, Rowena Chu and Zelda Perkins, and I wanted to absolutely honour them with some real weight within the film. And because, I mean, in life, the journalists had many phone calls with them and incrementally got their trust and faith. And, you know, you can't really do that filmically. So they just had sort of one shot at, you know, interviews that did happen. And I wanted those interviews to be kind of epic. Well, I'm not a fan of flashbacks normally at all, but I felt it was incredibly important to have a younger version of the survivors, just to visually see how young these women were when these horrific events happened. And I thought, well, the only way of that is for kind of, you know, playing around with chronology. So I wanted scenes, I think we all wanted scenes to show how old these women were, because it's just different seeing them than saying, well, I was 21 or I was 23, you know, because when you see how old these women were when they had to deal with it. They were just kids, you know, and it's terribly hard. So that was one thing. And the other thing was that those three women had input, a lot of input, like Zelda Perkins put in more lines, Ashley Judd put in more lines, you know, and we were absolutely open to that. Dee Dee Gardner was an incredible producer who just held that space and wanted everyone to feel like they were heard and seen. So it was really will Ashley do it? And we kind of felt she would, and she was incredibly supportive. And at the New York Film Festival, you know, she stood on stage afterwards and the whole of the auditorium stood up, and, you know, because she's just was so incredibly brave in that whole investigation and had written about him before and nobody had taken any notice. You know, she'd been brave before this and was ignored and actually punished. So she was incredible, is incredible. It was very much my structure, and it was very much from the beginning that we wouldn't see Weinstein himself and we wouldn't see any assaults, because, you know, we've seen enough assaults on women on screen for a lifetime. So that was very important to me. So I think, you know, it had absolutely my writing in it, but I didn't feel like I was alone in any way, because there was this kind of brilliant support system. The film is not about him. Obviously, it's about the investigation into him. So that was the decision there. And the assaults, however hard it is to hear the survivors recount them, I felt in a way that was them reclaiming their voice in some ways. And a lot of the survivors has said that the film is very healing for them, which was our intention. I'm also very conscious that I just want to write things that redress the balance where men are prevalent, you know, because if you look at the statistics, they're very depressing. Not only how many women are on stage or on screen, but how much they actually say. You know, you might say, well, there are lots of women in that film, but when you look at the line of how much they say, it's like that, whereas the men sort of go from here to the wall, you know, and I find that really depressing, that we're in a modern world of supposed equality and it's really not. So I find that more than anything else, if I'm taking on a project, I think, you know, where are the women and what are they saying? And how interesting are they? And so that is, you know, a mantle that I wear very proudly. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've got to fight against, you know, centuries of patriarchy. And so, you know, whatever one can do, in my case, it's writing, you do.